I remember seeing the guy. He had a rifle, and he's following us in because I'm hanging on the back of a Suburban. He had running boards and a handrail on top. So I'm hanging on that outside of the Suburban. I see him. I'm like, oh crap. To his credit, he saw 15 cars swooping in. He's like, I'm out. He knew that he would have been shot. One of our snipers who were there earlier, I'm surprised they didn't take the shot because he actually did swing that weapon toward us. He was lucky to get shot by one of our snipers.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have a Combat Story first with Greg Shaffer, who spent a career in the FBI as an agent, SWAT team member, and hostage rescue team operator. He also started his career leading a patrol boat team in the Coast Guard before moving over to the Bureau. In this episode, we talk about the selection and entry process to both the FBI and HRT, origins of the HRT, which is fascinating, numbers fewer than 500 members since its inception in the early 80s, one of the most successful surveillance and bust operations you're ever going to hear against the Bicycle Bandit. We'll talk Operation Black Widow, border security, taking down targets, and hunting the deck of cards in Iraq with Delta Force, and more. Greg now runs Schaefer Security Group that provides executive protection, active shooter response, investigations, firearms training, and more. He also wrote Stay Safe, Security Secrets for Today's Dangerous World, which provides practical lessons on mindset, situational awareness, and self-defense. It took us too long to have our first Bureau agent and HRT operator on the show, and we'll absolutely be looking to have more. With that, please enjoy this hilarious but very interesting discussion with former FBI agent and HRT operator Greg Shaffer. Greg, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Well, it's happy to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, as I mentioned before we hit record, you're the first Bureau agent that we've had on the show, and it's a long time coming since folks know from listening. My time at the agency, we do work very closely with our counterparts at the Bureau. I'm sure you've seen the ups and downs of that relationship of the agency and the Bureau. And we've talked just a little bit offline. You've got obviously Schaefer Security Group. And I wanted to kick off with, what are you seeing as the main threats? Like what are your clients asking you to do these days in the world that we live in that has more threats than anybody can handle? Where do you see the threats today?
Oh, that's an easy answer. It's the open borders that we have in the south, south of our nation. I can't comprehend how that has become a political issue because it is a national security issue. We are allowing just unvetted, unchecked, unskilled, unknown people by the tens of millions that enter our country. We know there are Chinese coming across. We know there are Venezuelans coming across, and Cubans and Somalians, and just countries that want to see the United States fail. We have, millions upon millions of people coming across the border, and it is a national security issue. This is not Biden versus Trump. This is not Republican versus Democrat. This is what is best for our nation. And most of the clients that call me now are trying to get a hold of me to do executive protection or protection, at a high net worth individual's residence, or a high net worth wedding, a special event, particularly along the southern states, where the influx of these immigrants are coming across. So right now, that's what I see as the major threat to our nation right now, is just these people coming across that are unchecked and unvetted. I mean, the number of MS-13 individuals that have come across just in the last 2 to 3 years is unconscionable. I don't understand how it's happening. I don't understand the rationale behind the administration allowing this to happen, because this is truly, truly a national security threat.
I'm sure you spent time looking at all sorts of threats that we'll get into here with your time in service. But for the layman out there who's looking at this thinking, how could this happen? How is it so easy to get across this border?
Well, our border patrol is just they're limited in number of individuals. It's a manpower issue, and then it's also a budgetary issue where they don't have the money to buy the drones and the high technology that's required to put a virtual fence up along the border. Basically, we don't have the will to close our border down. If we had the will, we certainly could find a way to do it. With the amount of money we're giving to other countries to build their security on their borders, it's 1,000 times fold what we needed just to finish the wall just a few years back. What's happening on the southern border is just for some reason, the United States government and its people do not have the wherewithal and the will right now to shut that down, which I don't understand. I mean, I got kids, I got grandkids, and that's my greatest fear for them.
Right now that we're all properly scared of what's going on at the border, I wanted to ask about this picture behind you. It looks like you've got what I would call like a squad of tactical folks with their weapons and gear on and a logo behind it, framed very nicely. For those who can't see it, just trying to articulate for the people listening, what is that picture? What is it depicting?
That is James Dietz. He's a very famous
Mm-hmm.
artist that initially started his work doing sketches, black and white sketches of police officers, EMS, firefighters, that sort of thing. And that was commissioned by an HRT operator by the name of Scotty Warren. And Scott Warren was on the team for many, many years. He was the principal firearm instructor when he retired from the HRT. And he commissioned Mr. Dietz to do that. And there's only 500 copies that were made. So the original oil painting is in the HRT headquarters in Quantico, Virginia. But every former and current operator alive got a copy of this. And again, so I have copy number 192 of 500. So
Wow.
it's definitely a prized possession, and it shows what it shows is the individual in the middle is in a suit and tie, because every HRT operator starts off as an FBI agent, and then he's surrounded by, you can see an assaulter, a breacher, a medical guy, a canine handler, and a sniper. And then in the background, in the mist, are the guys that back them up. So the operator that back them up.
And is that, you said 500 copies? Like, is that how small that community is?
Yes, in the history of the HRT, which actually its first operations were in 1983, there have been less than 450 operators in the history of the HRT.
Wow. Small, you must, everybody knows everybody. So reputation's got to be critical there, I have to imagine.
We just had our 40th HRT reunion just last year.
Does that get pretty crazy?
A little bit. It's a weekend long event. They have a golf tournament, of course, and then the current team puts on a big demonstration for the families, because you bring the wives and kids. And then in the evening, on Saturday evening, they have a really nice, catered dinner at the U.S. Marine Corps Museum right there on the base Quantico. So it's a great venue to have an event like that. And yeah, there is some liquor drunk and some beer spilled and some stories told, not all necessarily accurate and true, but it's a fun
Yeah.
time. I mean, you are in the community, you just the HRT and that small knit community of less than 450 operators in the history of the team just make it just such a unique band of brothers.
That's amazing. So envious. That's cool. And that museum is amazing. The Marine Corps
Yeah.
Museum of Quantico is something else. So since you're the first we've had on here, what is it that draws somebody as they're growing up to this career in law enforcement, specifically the Bureau? Where does it hit for you?
And I address this in my book as well, and I get that question asked all the time. I think it's just it's in your blood, it's in your DNA. My daughter's a special education teacher. I had a daughter think about going into nursing. I think law enforcement, the medical field, teaching. I think it's a calling. It's just you don't do it for the money, of course. You don't do it for
Lord
fame
knows
or
that.
you don't do it for fame or fortune. It's just if you're in the law enforcement business, because being a police officer or a federal agent, it's in your blood, it's in your DNA. It's something I knew I wanted to do at a very, very early age. It's the reason I chose to attend the U.S. Coast Guard Academy instead of the U.S. Naval Academy. A little story behind there. This is 1980 when I graduated from high school. Had an appointment to the Naval Academy and had an appointment to the Coast Guard Academy. And this is when Jimmy Carter was president. Being in the military wasn't really a cool thing the way it is now. That and the fact I wanted to play football, and one was Division III versus one was Division I. But the law enforcement aspect of the Coast Guard, Smokies of the Sea, doing drug interdiction, because in the 80s, the drug smugglers were having their heyday, bringing loads of marijuana across and cocaine across the seas, from the north coast of South America. And just that whole law enforcement just really grabbed me. So that's why I chose the Coast Guard Academy over the Naval Academy. And then from the Coast Guard Academy, in the Coast Guard, had command of my own patrol boat, making 40 and 50-ton seizures of marijuana, 2 tons of cocaine, working very closely with the DEA. Um, a little bit of my history, the DEA it gave the Coast Guard most of the information, most of the intelligence based on their informants of when these boats are coming across. And this is in South Florida, where my boat was home ported in Fort Myers Beach, Florida. So we'd go out there based on DEA informant information, locate the vessel, and then seize the vessel, and then go to trial, and meet with the DEA agents behind it. So, as a lieutenant, knowing I was, at the end of my 5-year commitment from the academy, they were recruiting me really heavily for the DEA. Um, about that same exact time, my younger brother joins the Secret Service. So he did 25 years in the Secret Service,
Wow.
and he's like, hey, this federal law enforcement thing is a pretty cool gig. You might want to look into it. So you know, when my commitment was up in the Coast Guard, I applied to all the 3-letter agencies, including the agency. At the time it was Customs, Border Patrol, FBI, DEA, CIA, Marshal Service, ATF. I applied to them all, and but I really wanted the FBI because I knew that they had the widest jurisdiction, and talking to the DEA agents, very honestly, they did say that working dope for 20 years is hard. And my first 5 years in the bureau, I worked dope on a DEA task force. Had a great time, but I'm young, dumb, full of
Yeah.
what they say, and kicking indoors, and you go to work at 2 in the afternoon, you don't get off till 2 in the morning. When you're in your early 30s, that's awesome. But to do that for 20 years, yeah. So I'm glad I worked dope for 5 years, but I couldn't see myself doing it for 20 years. So anyway, the FBI offered me a position, and I happily took it and never looked back.
Interesting. How about just as you're growing up, like what's the family dynamics there? Would they have been surprised to know that you and your brother go into this life of service?
No, I mean, my dad was the Vietnam era aged individual, but he got married early and had kids early, so he was waived for having to go to Vietnam. I'm one of 4 boys, and of the 4 boys, 3 of us, worked for the government in some capacity, and then the fourth one, the oldest one, in fact, has his own business. So, yeah, FBI, Secret Service, and U.S. Navy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Okay. I'm interested about the Coast Guard from the perspective of what it taught you as you went into the bureau. Um, people have their own idea of what the Coast Guard might be like, but as you talked about having your own patrol boat, leading people doing seizures, what were some of the key aspects that you feel like you picked up there that transitioned nicely to the bureau?
I think teamwork is the key component there. Again, as a Lieutenant JG in '02, very lowly ranked officer, be given the responsibility of commanding an 82-foot patrol boat with a crew of 12 in South Florida at the height of the drug war. I mean, and that's one of the great things I love about the Coast Guard is they give a lot of responsibility at a very early young rank. So as an '02, having a patrol boat that once that boat leaves the pier, I'm in charge of everything that happens. I'm responsible for everything that happens. Everything good, everything bad falls on the commanding officer. And it really taught me about accountability, about responsibility, about leadership. Um, and we're out there doing search and rescue in 20-foot seas, and and everybody's scared because on an 82-foot patrol boat, 20-foot seas is something to be concerned about. And we were out there many times, and there were definitely moments where I really was not that confident that we might not be returning to home port. I mean, I was as scared of dying on a patrol boat in the Coast Guard as I was in some of these operations at HRT. And but that fear is healthy. I mean, because you control it, you overcome it, uh, and that just teaches you a lot about yourself. So I think I took those examples when I went to the FBI, particularly working on the squad, doing drug squad in San Francisco, but even more so once you get on HRT and you're doing, these operations overseas with a small team and with the QRF being an hour away.
And when you're in those boats, first of all, what's the name of the patrol boat? Because I'd like to get a picture up for people so they could see it. Is there a
It's been decommissioned now. It's called the Coast Guard Cutter Point Steel, Steele. The
okay?
whole number was 82359, based out of Fort Myers Beach, Florida. And I had a great crew and still keep in contact with a lot of the guys on my crew. And it was just, it was one of the greatest jobs a human being could ever have.
If you still wanted to continue serving, why not stay in the Coast Guard? What was the decision point for you?
Couple things. One, family. Married, had my first child at the time. In the Coast Guard, the higher up in rank you get, the bigger the boats. The bigger the boats, the more time at sea. The more time at sea, the more time away from home. As much as I love the Coast Guard and the education they gave me at the academy is unmatched. Um, I really just had that draw to get my hands more dirty in the law enforcement. Because as a junior officer, yeah, you're a boarding officer. You go on the other boats while you're boarding them. As a 04, 05, or even 06 commanding officer, you're not doing. I mean, your ship's doing law enforcement, but you never leave the ship. You're the guy in command. So I guess I just wanted again get my hands dirty. I wanted to do the habeas corpus and put bad people in prison.
That's great. How much has the accession selection program changed over time? I would assume it's fairly similar. At least the agency was for sure, from what I understand. Did it change much from when you started till today?
Significantly. Just to get into the FBI, I got in 1995. Um, at that time, they were having new agent classes every 2 weeks for about a year. They had a huge hiring push. They had a lot of agents retiring, so they had two classes per month, 50 individuals per class. In my class of 50, 80% were former military or police officers,
Yeah.
and 20% were miscellaneous. It's completely opposite now. Now you have classes of 50 going through the FBI Academy in Quantico, and you only have about 20% that are former military and former police officers. Now, that had a huge impact on HRT selection as well, because obviously HRT, to try out for that, a majority, not all of them, but a majority of those that try out for HRT have that, law enforcement, SWAT, special forces, military background. So we had a bigger pool to choose from when I was in. We would have selections and there'd be 50, 60 people trying out for a selection. When I was on the team, the hiring requirements kind of flip flopped where we were getting only 20%, and we were only getting sometimes 25 to 30 people per selection tryout. So, we had less people to choose from. As a result of that, the HRT actually went to headquarters and developed a hiring program that would give those with significant police experience or special forces experience a leg up in getting into the bureau. Former military, particularly special forces, or came from a large city SWAT team, there would be hiring preferences to hire you because the HRT was getting so blasted and just not having the quality that people needed to make the team.
How difficult was the entrance program going into the bureau?
It takes about a year for the whole thing to go. I mean, again, you were an agency guy, so you know that. So I get a lot of phone calls from young guys. They see my LinkedIn profile and they say, "Hey, I want to do what you did. I want to mimic your career. How do I do that?" And I always tell them, if you're thinking about joining the bureau, put your application in, because that first 3-page application, it just starts the process. You won't get a letter in the mail that says, "Come to the academy for another 10, 11, 12 months." You got the initial questionnaire, 3-page questionnaire, just kind of, separates the chaff from those who have a chance to get in. Then you have the background check, which depending on how many times you moved and, when you're growing up, it can take anywhere from 5 months to 8 months. Then you have the physical fitness requirement. Then you have the physical exam. Then you have the polygraph exam. So it's a long, lengthy process. So I tell everybody, if you're thinking about joining the bureau, go ahead and start the process, because you will have a year to change your mind. It is hard. You have to have good grades, obviously a clean record. Um, the polygraph. 75% fail the polygraph.
That is not a fun event.
75% fail it in the FBI anyway. I don't understand that. So it's a very lengthy process. The bureau has changed in the last few years, but for the most part, the street agents are still pretty patriotic with a warrior mindset and just want to put bad guys in prison.
Once you get your foot in the door, that training pipeline, how close does Hollywood get to that? How accurate does it get?
There are some really bad shows on TV that depict the FBI. The two movies that stand out to me that I think did a pretty good job representing the FBI one's called The Town with Ben Affleck, but it's about a Boston area bank robbery people and the bank robbery squad of the FBI trying to catch them. So that does a good job in looking at what the bureau does, how they develop cases, that sort of thing in bank robbery. So The Town is one. Heat is another pretty good one. Yeah, with who was that? Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. That was pretty good. Then you have crazy things like the FBI who's a beauty queen or something like that. That just you watch this and with Sandra Bullock. I forgot what the movie's called.
Kind of during that entrance program, you're learning about the casework, I assume, the judicial process for those who didn't have any exposure to it before, probably firearms training. There's a physical component. What ends up being the biggest grind for people, or the thing that ends up weeding the most people out? Just a quick word from our sponsor, HelloFresh, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Oh, how we love HelloFresh in our family. We've been using it for years and long before they sponsored the show. You can ditch the meal planning woes and dive into HelloFresh's biggest menu yet, with over 45 recipes and even more market items to choose from every week. You can ring in springtime with fresh seasonal produce, picked at peak ripeness, delivered straight to your door. We just had guests stay with us recently, and instead of trying to find all the ingredients to feed 10 people, we just ordered extra HelloFresh for the week, and it was a hit. And even when we forget to put in our HelloFresh selections, which can happen in a busy family, as you all know, it doesn't matter because we get something new that always tastes great, and that's no joke. We like everything they've sent to us, whether we chose it or not. So go to HelloFresh.com/CombatStorySuite for free dessert for life. One dessert item per box while subscription is active. That's free dessert for life at HelloFresh.com/CombatStorySuite. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. And now, back to this combat story.
Well, they don't want you to fail because they've already invested a lot of money in just on your background check and getting you to the place that you're at. Once you step through the gates of Quantico at the FBI Academy, they've already invested several $100,000 into you to get everything done, to check you out to make sure you are the right person for the job, and you're not a sleeper cell spy or something. So they don't want you to fail. So the academics, if you pay attention in class, you attend the review session before the exam, it's pretty easy. But still, some people have the problem with the academics. But I just don't. It wasn't that hard. Physical fitness, again, for physical fitness, that was a breeze for me. That was easy. But for some people that come there out of shape, that's a hurdle that they have to overcome. Firearms, again, I've always shot since I was a kid. I always loved it. Firearms was part of the best part about the FBI Academy. So it depends on what your weaknesses are and what your background is. Yeah, and working in teams. You have what we call Hogan's Alley there at the FBI Academy. Hogan's Alley is a fake town. It has a pool hall. It has a theater. It has what they call the most robbed bank in America, because it gets robbed about 2 or 3 times a week by different FBI classes and that sort of thing. And people have a hard time with that scenario-based training. It just, for some reason, just doesn't click for them. It's not arduous, but it takes a commitment and takes dedication and the desire. I think if you have the desire to do this, you'll overcome anything that they throw at you. Again, it's not that difficult, but some people may find it difficult.
I always find it interesting how these different organizations select follow-on assignments. So I'm curious what it's like when you're at the bureau. Like, are you competing with your class for assignments? You mentioned you go and do dope for the first assignment out of the gates. I assume there are several options and duty locations. How do they determine where you go, and how do they tell you where you're going?
There are 56 field offices in the FBI, and at about week 8 of I forgot how many weeks it is now, about 5 or 6 months for FBI training now. About week 8 or 9, you rank order 1 through 56, the offices you want to go to. If you put New York #1 or Newark or Philadelphia or LA, you'll get your #1 slot. If you put Minneapolis, Minnesota, as your number one pick, there's a good chance you're not going to get that one because Minneapolis only has maybe 30 agents total in the entire office. So you rank order all 56 offices, and about 3/4 into before you finish the FBI training, they have a big night, like a billet night, and you go up on stage and they tell you, where you're going. So that's how that works. And then of course everybody throws in $1 or $2, whatever the kitty is, and the person who has the lowest, person who gets selected for his lowest ranked city, gets a cash, reward.
What's like a low rank city? Is it like middle of nowhere?
No, the low ranked cities are usually like New York, high cost of living, New York, San Francisco, because you're GS10 and you're not making a whole lot of money, and a lot of people, but some people love New York. I mean, or LA or San Francisco. So there's always a few people in the class that want to go there, and go, thank God, that means I won't go there.
But you're not getting assigned a discipline. I don't know what you would call it, but you said dope or white collar or whatever it is. You're not getting that. It just depends when you hit your unit.
Yes, when you get to the field office, then they look at your background, and it depends on who the SAC is. SAC is Special Agent in Charge. Depends on who's in charge of that division of the FBI, whether they want you input or not. Someone just look at your background, say he's well suited for this, and we need a person there. A lot depends on, as I say, the needs of the service over the needs of the individual. I had a great supervisor in my first office in San Francisco. Female supervisor, was a great lady, good agent, and she knew I worked dope in the Coast Guard. She knew, she met me, knew my personality, and she's like, "Yeah, you're going to do a drug task force." And then what was great too is usually before you get on the SWAT team in the FBI, you have to have at least 2 years of FBI service. Well, when I got in 1995, the FBI was doing enhanced SWAT teams. So they picked 7 cities across the nation to have enhanced SWAT teams. And these enhanced SWAT teams would go from like having 15 SWAT team members to like 45 or 50. And HRT came in and would give advanced training to these enhanced SWAT teams. So San Francisco was one of the 7 cities chosen to have an enhanced SWAT team. So the SAC said that if you have military or police experience, we're going to not require you to have 2 years of field experience in the FBI. You can try out for a SWAT team if your supervisor approves it. So I reported to my office in San Francisco like on August 1st. And I think on November 15th, 45 days later, they were having SWAT tryouts. And my supervisor says, go for it. So I was able to get on the SWAT team and be on the drug task force on my first couple of years in the FBI. So it was, it was great. And that was my first, contact with the HRT, because they came out to San Francisco and helped train us in some advanced CQB skills. And, we got better weapons, we got better equipment, we did a lot of helicopter work with the HRT. So when they went somewhere and they needed, like when Delta Force goes out and does an operation, they'll take Rangers with them. Well, HRT is the same thing. When HRT goes out, they may need some enhanced personnel, so they'll bring an enhanced SWAT team with them. So I went to the embassy bombings in Nairobi and Tanzania when that happened in 1998. Again, because we were part of the enhanced SWAT team. So my first couple of years in the FBI was absolutely fantastic, because again, I was on a drug task force, knocking on a lot of doors, making a lot of arrests, developing a lot of informants, and also being on the SWAT team.
So we'll dig into a lot of this. I'm wondering, mid 90s, what's the morale and sentiment like at the Bureau at that time? It ebbs and flows in these organizations. What was it like getting in there? Obviously, you're excited, you're joining, but for the people who've been there, how are they feeling about the Bureau at that point? What are they worried about?
It was a great time to get into Bureau. It really was almost like it was a heyday. Louis Freeh was a director. Louis Freeh was recognized as what they call the agents director. He's one of, I think, the only director of the FBI who was actually a field agent at some point in time. Usually they're judges they bring in, and the judge takes over as director of the FBI. But Louis Freeh was a field agent in the New York field offices, early in his career. So he came in and really set a high standard for the agents. He had what he called the bright line policy, and it was like, there is no drinking on the job. It used to be a bunch of agents would, after work, go out in their bureau cars, go out in the bureau cars and have a few drinks at the local pub and drive home at night. And that was cut off immediately. And there's a lot of lot of disgruntled older guys are, were not
I
very
bet.
happy. But Louis Freeh really came in and really set that bar high, and I think it really, was really appreciated by most agents, particularly a new agent like myself. I'm like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This, I mean, so yeah, I took my hat to Louis Freeh. He was the last really good director of the FBI.
What is the one thing you're trying to milestone maybe that you're trying to hit when you're new at the bureau? Like at the agency, you want to recruit a source. When you're in the army, you want to be in a gunfight. What is it for the bureau as an agent?
Oh, making arrests, making cases, making cases and making arrests. And with that comes informant development. I was, I just remember I was really good at developing informants, and I got my first, monetary award. The FBI, gives out monetary awards for certain things, and my supervisor put me in for an award. I think it was like $500 because I developed so many informants in my first year in the bureau. But with those informants comes cases. With those cases come indictments. Those indictments come arrests, and with arrests come convictions. And that's the mark of a good agent. It's like, how many cases do you have, and how many convictions did you get on those cases?
Can you take us through the first time you're actually doing the job? If you can remember back to that time, like whether it's going to meet your first informant, your first time going and kicking in a door. I always like to hear from a combat vet's first time outside the wire. And I don't know what the equivalent is, but what do you remember at that time?
Yeah, I guess there's two cases. One is a pretty famous case, Operation Black Widow. And you actually Google that. It was a case against the Nuestra Familia, which is our family in Spanish. It was a Mexican gang that was being run from Pelican Bay State Prison and a couple other prisons. And myself and another agent developed a source who was a Nuestra Familia member who had made his bones and had, some say 13 murders under his belt. We flipped him, started Operation Black Widow with the Santa Rosa Police Department and the FBI, and we ended up indicting 21 people. We ended up stopping 6 kills, 6 murders. And it went on for 5 years. I got transferred to the HRT after year 3, but I started the Operation Black Widow with another couple of agents, and it was just real interesting when we running informants in a prison, obviously working with the BOP as well, Bureau of Prisons, but working this guy on the street and knowing that one wrong turn and he'd be one of the, I think New Western Familia was credited with 600 murders. He'd be one of 600 murders if it was ever found out. We set up a music recording studio. He was a wannabe rap star, so we built him a rap studio where he would have all his meetings, and we had that place wired for sound. I mean, literally wired for sound. So with cameras. So he'd be rapping in there, cutting albums and stuff like that, and he'd have all his players come in to meet with them, and everything that was said and done in that recording studio was recorded. Um, so it's just watching the FBI at that level, because it obviously became it started off on just Northern California drug case to this national directors getting briefed on the case kind of operations. That was way cool. I mean, you can't get a better operation than that in the FBI.
What was the first meeting like?
No, okay. The first meeting, like with the informant.
Yeah, like this is the guy who has like 13 murders to his name, and you're just gonna go meet him? Like where do you meet this guy? How do you do that?
We had an offsite. FBI had an offsite, and I pissed him off when I first met him because I made him take his shirt off because I want to get pictures of all his tattoos. Because I said, I want to see who you are, and he got offended. I would ask him to undress. It was just myself and 3 other agents. But yeah, it took me a while to get over that with him. He didn't trust me after that. But again, it was just running him, and selling a lot of dope, letting a lot of coke and a lot of methamphetamine walk, you know. And that's why the local agencies bring the FBI in. We have deep pockets. You know, a local agency only has, let's say $30,000 a year for buy money. The FBI will buy, a kilo and a half of cocaine for 30 grand and let it walk. Just let the money go. So that's the entire budget for buy money for the police department, and we just let 30 grand walk. That's why a lot of local departments bring in the FBI because of our deep pockets and and our technical surveillance capabilities. Like building a recording studio and having it wired for.
That's a great one. What a great cover for that. Sorry, you were also saying on the lighter side, and I interrupted you.
That's okay. The Bicycle Bandit. Okay, the Bicycle Bandit. It seems like once you get about 4 or 5 bank robberies underneath your belt, and we know you're the same guy, the FBI kind of gives you nicknames. Well, this guy was a Bicycle Bandit, obviously because he robbed banks with a bicycle. He was on bank number 13. His defining feature were these eyebrows. I swear, I mean, like caterpillars. All right, there's one huge unibrow. I'm just thick as mud, dark black, and just So banks historically have these really cheap cameras in the bank. So a bank robbery happened. You get the surveillance tapes, from the VHS recorder in the back room. This shows you how old I am. And you pull the tape out, and it's like the quality is so bad. But there's one defining feature, this unibrow this guy had. So he's robbed 12 banks. Lo and behold, we got an anonymous call say, hey, it looks like this guy I know who's staying at this motel in Northern California. So my partner and I roll up there, and we go up to the hotel, identify ourselves to the clerk, and it was one of those motels, like 2 stories with a railing in front and everything else. So we identify ourselves to the owner of the motel, show a grainy picture of this guy, say, hey, is this guy staying here? And he's like, yeah, it looks like the guy who's staying in, room 21C or whatever the case was. Like, okay. So we come the next day and we're prepped for surveillance. So we're 2 different cars, got our binoculars, got our piss bottle or our candies and our sweets and our coffees, and we're ready for a long, drawn out surveillance. We're there for 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes. This guy walks out of the room, right? Opens the door and comes, just a big stretch and puts his hands right on the railing in front of his hotel room. I'm like this in my binoculars. I'm like, that's the dude. That's him. It's got to be him. Those eyebrows don't exist anywhere in the world or something in the sky. We were there for 5 minutes. Greatest surveillance in history. So, so I call my boss and I think this is the guy, blah, blah, blah. He goes, okay, well, stand by. And like 10 minutes go by, and this guy goes downstairs, gets into his car, and starts driving away. I'm like, crap, we only have 2 cars. It's easy to get burned in a surveillance with 2 cars. So I'm calling the office. I need more cars on the surveillance. This guy is moving. He's a bicycle bandit. I know it is, blah, blah, blah. So we're driving down south towards San Francisco. Now I got like 3 or 4 cars with me. We're doing a surveillance. And he pulls off the side of the road and parks the car on the side of the road, goes underneath an overpass. And once he pull out from underneath the overpass, a bicycle, throws it in his trunk. I told you this is a good story. So he drives, makes another stop, picks up a friend, and then drives in downtown San Francisco, which is like a 40-mile drive from where we first picked him up from the motel. And he starts circling the block, and once on the block, a bank. So by this time, I'm calling my boss. He's calling the U.S. Attorney's office, and my boss says, "Okay, Greg, here's the plan. Let him rob the bank." I'm like, "I'm sorry, say it again. Can I get that in writing? Because if he goes in the bank and hurts somebody, man, we're screwed." So he goes, "Let him rob the bank, and when he comes out, he goes, I'll be there because he's a supervisor. He'll be there, for this. He goes, I'll distract him, and you grab him from behind." I'm like, "Oh wow, there's a plan."
Was he usually armed?
He never. He threatened he had a weapon, but never brandished.
Never confirmed.
One. Yeah, never brandished it. Again, long story short, he goes in the bank. We follow him. I got like 8 guys around the bank, and we're ready to pounce on him. He comes down the stairs because actually he's like 5 stairs to the bank. Again, San Francisco has a lot of those high-rise banks and stuff like that. He comes down the stairs, and my boss actually runs up to him and says, "Excuse me, sir, do you have the time?" Just to distract him. So he asked for the time, and the guy always stopped but didn't give him the time. I run behind him, I bear hug him, I body slam him to the ground, and then I grab him, put his hand behind the back, I handcuff him, and then I'm starting to search him, up his jacket, and it's like in the movies. $20 bills are floating in the air now on a windy San Francisco day, and just so anyway, we got the Bicycle Bandit on bank number 13. And
that has to be the greatest surveillance, like 5 minutes on target. You see him, you literally follow him to a bank heist, and he goes in and robs it.
And he picks up a bike first.
Did he steal that bike, or did he just have it positioned somewhere for?
I don't remember.
Oh my gosh, that's a great one. Dang. Hey, so after a bust like that, when you go back to the office, what do you all do to celebrate, if anything? Or is it just like, hey, we're on to the next case?
No, we used to go out and celebrate. Yeah, definitely. You go out and pop a few brews. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
So,
that's incredible. Oh, so this is when you're running
mhm.
like this, the I don't want to say traditional, but this is on like the agent dope side, not the SWAT side.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
All right. How about on the SWAT side? Like, what type of work are you doing SWAT wise or on this enhanced SWAT team when you're in San Francisco? Like, what's that type of work look like for people who haven't ever seen that?
Well, the FBI SWAT team in San Francisco arrested a Unabomber up in his cabin up in Montana. I was on a team and we hit a huge HA Hell's Angels, big eight Hell's Angels compound, had watchtowers and machine guns and everything. We rolled in there one morning about 3 a.m. and took them down. On this particular case, I think we briefed this operation in the San Jose arena. I mean, there were probably 35, 40 different agencies involved in this. I mean, we were hitting like probably 15 at least different locations simultaneously. So we had SWAT teams from 20, 30 different agencies, local police doing roadblocks for us, and that sort of thing. So, there was 350 police officers at this briefing. And it was like done at 2:30 in the morning, and we hit like at 4:30, but we do it simultaneously so they couldn't call each other and warn each other, destroy evidence, or flee. So those operations were always a lot of fun. Multi-agency, hundreds of police officers, hundreds of SWAT officers, and you're hitting them first thing in the morning. So
How did you move, like in that one? Were you flown onto target? Are you riding in the back of a SWAT vehicle? Is it a nondescript vehicle?
it depends on on that one there. We were actually in a Bearcat. Most enhanced SWAT teams always had the Bearcats, and some Hummers as well. So on that one, I think, and we always had Suburbans as well. So on that one, I think we were running the Bearcat that went in initially because we knew it was a big compound and they had watchtowers. So I remember seeing the guy. He had a rifle and he's following us in because I'm hanging on in the back of a Suburban. He had running boards and handrails on top. So I'm hanging on that outside of Suburban. I see him. I'm like, oh crap! But to his credit, he saw 15 cars swooping in. He's like, I'm out. He knew he would have been shot. One of our snipers who were there earlier, I'm surprised I take the shot because he actually did swing that weapon toward us. He was lucky he didn't get shot by one of our snipers.
And when you go in on something like that, because you have that kind of overwhelming force, is it typically unusual to see shots fired by kind of the folks on the inside, or does it get pretty heated?
And yeah, it depends on the situation. I mean, you see it all the time, shots being fired on these SWAT raids. On this particular one, there were no shots fired. But I think we arrested like 18 people at that site. And in the entire day, there were like 60 arrested that one day.
That
So,
sounds like such a complex op to pull off for disparate agencies, organizations, and even SWAT teams. Like, would you train at that level with that many groups, or you just had it down?
no, I mean, military does a lot of it the same way. You just multiple different agencies, multiple units. You can't really train that way. So you just say you just do your part of the puzzle. So San Jose SWAT team, this is you hit this place. You devise a plan on how to hit it. San Rafael, your SWAT team hits this. Novato, your SWAT team hits that. San Francisco FBI, you have this. So you just worry about your piece of the puzzle. You do your job, let everybody else do their jobs, and we'll all come home safe. So that's kind of how that works. And of course, you have a command center, a command post, where all the chiefs and the FBI, SAC is usually in charge of all that. But he has all the chiefs of the local agencies that are working with us all in the command post, and they're trying to manage it from their perspective, from the 50,000-foot view.
Yeah. What is the team? What are the team dynamics like on a SWAT team? Maybe the one that you were a part of. Like, what is the kind of esprit de corps, morale? Like, how are guys talking to each other? What's that like?
Oh, it's fun, it's friendly, it's you get to have thick skin. If they find a weakness, they're like
You're done.
yeah, they'll poke it like a snake. So you have to have thick skin, and with the enhanced SWAT teams, like most SWAT teams, you only train 3 or 4 days a month. So less than a week a month, you're training. So training days, they're really no nonsense because the team leader knows. Listen, I only got 3 days with these guys the entire month, so he's a good team leader. Is very quick to say, okay, let's knock off the bullshit. You know, we'll do the camaraderie thing and the beer thing afterwards, but for the next 3 days, we need to focus on this. Whereas, like when HRT or larger city SWAT teams like LA and New York, it's a full-time team. So you're training, 5 days a week, if not 7 days a week. The difference between, like an FBI SWAT team in a regular office versus HRT is just, it's a full-time, gig versus, 2 or 3 or 4 days a month.
How difficult is it to operate? I mean, just doing that job in general, not just SWAT, but the regular work of an agent and just law enforcement in general. But I think the thing that when I talk to vets, combat vets who have never had the law enforcement background, the thing we always come back to is when we were fighting, we were 3,000 miles from our homes and our families, but you're going back home every night to your family in the environment that you're operating in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you keep the separation mentally from keeping your family safe, not blowing your own
Mm-hmm.
cover, being seen by somebody in your daily life? How the heck do you handle that?
I never worked undercover, but I know that's a huge issue with undercover agents, especially those that go, deep dark for years at a time. They always come out a little damaged.
Yeah.
Um, but for my part, it's that ability to just separate things in your mind. It's that, shut off the family, turn on the SWAT guy, and just the ability to switch those on and off. Um, it's not easy to do. It can be done. I think those that have successful marriages and don't get divorced are able to do that. But it is certainly, hands down, definitely an issue that needs to be worked on and or resolved. Otherwise, you're going to burn yourself out. You can't be switched on the whole time. And you see this in the military, particularly when you guys were overseas and doing 15-month deployments. Again, when I was in HRT, I don't want to shift gears too much, but we were doing 3 and 4 month deployments with either Dev Group or with CAG. 3 or 4 months is easy to do. And you guys, some of these Army guys, Marine guys, 15 months before they got home again. It's like, dang,
Yeah.
that's a long time to ask somebody to do that. And then you look back in World War II, where some of these guys are gone for 3 and 4 years. Um, that's what causes the PTSD. I think that's what causes a lot of the issues these guys are having coming back, is that they were switched on for so long that they forgot how to switch it off. So being a SWAT guy, being an FBI agent, on off, on off, on off all the time, I think actually um, helps you mentally, in the long run.
I guess I'm also thinking, even though you're not undercover, you're going to go hit a compound, Hell's Angels, where it's probably not hard to figure out who you are in the aftermath if they want to know who came and raided them and then get a little payback.
Well,
I mean,
especially when you go to trial.
yeah,
Like
you're standing up there.
you're sitting at prosecutor's table, sitting with the U.S. attorney, and you're trying these guys because they didn't want to plead out. They wanted to take it to trial. So you're like, yeah, here I was there. Here's what I did. Here's when I arrested them. Here's what I took off of them. Here's the evidence. I mean, yeah, they know your full name. So
It's you just got to hope that they don't. And kind of this idea that you mess with a cop or a cop's family or an agent's family, like hell, you got hell to pay. I guess, Greg, let's transition. So you do, I think you said 5 years in San Fran. Where do you go to next? Is it HRT or no?
yeah, HRT. Yeah.
How hard is it to make that transition? I assume it's very selective at the time, and is it pre 9/11 when you make the transition?
Yes, yes it is.
Wow, just barely, huh?
I actually I tried out twice.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mint Mobile, and we'll get right back to this combat story. My favorite spring cleaning takeaway is the post-clean clarity you get. Wow, how have I been living like this? It's kind of like when you find out you've been paying a fortune for your wireless plan, when Mint Mobile has phone plans for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month, and all plans come with high-speed data, unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. We still use Mint Mobile for one of the phones in our house that we give to our kids at times, and I also use it for combat story work. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/combat story. That's mintmobile.com/combat story. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/combat story. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. And now, back to this combat story.
I made it through my first selection. I think about 50, 60 guys tried out. My first selection, I believe there were 13 standing at the end of the 2 weeks, and they took, I think, 6 of the 13. I wasn't chosen one of the 6. That's a hard nut to swallow. I mean, obviously you're disappointed. They don't tell you why. They give you some indications of where you could have done better, but they're very, very close hold to the chest about what they let out. And they tell you, at the end of the phone call, when they tell you that you didn't make the team, we would like to see you try out again. So they will invite you back. So I did get, we would like to see you try out again. I just think I was, I only had 3 years in the FBI at the time. I think I was too green, a little too gung ho. In my second tryout, we had a guy come to the office and the squad I was assigned to. I don't think he won't mind me using his name. He's retired now. Scott Ward. And Scott Ward was a 6'4", 240-pound former Navy SEAL. Now, most Navy SEALs aren't that large. This guy, at his size, swam like a fish and ran like a gazelle. Okay, so he comes to my office, my small RA in Northern California, and I'm assigned as his training agent. Now, when I came in to the same office, my training agent had like 28 years in the bureau. This guy comes in and my supervisor says, "You're his training agent." I'm like, "I got 3 years there. What are you talking about?" But she goes, "You'll do fine, blah, blah, blah." So, of course, we developed a great friendship. I had the utmost respect for him and what he does. So I went to selection, came back, didn't get picked up. And he goes, "You'll make it the next time. I'll make sure of it." So he trained me for the second selection. And the advice that he told me is why I made it. He says, "Be the gray man." And you've heard the term before, the gray man. He goes, when your picture gets thrown on that screen during the selection process at the end of the 2 weeks, you want all the operators look at you and go, "Yeah, I remember him. He did a good job. Can't say anything fantastic about him. Can't say anything bad about him. He's a good, solid dude." That's all you want to be. Be the good, solid dude. Help out your other teammates as much as you can, but be the gray man. And I went in there with that gray man attitude. And my second tryout, fortunately, I was able to make it through that one as well, and got picked up. So,
What is that 2 weeks like? Is it a smoke session? Is it just tactical proficiency that they're checking? Is it a little of both?
a little of both. It's modeled after Hell Week at Buds. It's you sleep deprived, food deprived. You're cold, wet, tired, miserable, and hungry. And what differentiates our selection from other selections is that one, it was much shorter for sure, but they'll get you at your worst, where you again, you're cold, wet, tired, miserable, and hungry, and you haven't slept, and you're just exhausted. Then they put a gun in your hand and put you in a shoot no shoot situation. So they want to see how well your decision-making processes are when you are at your worst. I think that's the key behind HRT selection is, let's beat you down and then look at your decision-making processes. And let's also look at how well you treat others. How good of a teammate are you when, one of the tricks they do, that let's say there's 18 selectees left. They'll throw a carton of MREs in and say, "Here's your lunch." Well, there's 12 MREs in a carton. There's 18 guys. Are you the guy that grabs an MRE, grabs it, rips it open, goes sit in the corner and eat it? Or are you the guy that says, "Whoa, whoa, 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 wait a minute. There's 18 of us, there's only 12 of these. Let's divide it up." So which one are you? So there's mind games. Everything's measured. Everything's watched. I mean, everything is watched and measured. And they have this incredibly huge, and you learn about the selection process, obviously, once you're an operator, but it is tried and true. It's been in existence for a long time, and it works. And we've never had an HRT operator, do bad things, because they are very well vetted.
And do you go on to do advanced training on the back end of that, just maybe depending on where you're going to be assigned or some of the skills they want you to pick up?
Oh yeah, the selections is not just selection. After you get picked up, now you have almost a year's worth of what we call NOTS, New Operator Training School. And that's where you get Draeger certified, you get Halo certified. It's where you learn CQB skills. That's where you learn, all the different weapon systems. That's how you learn advanced surveillance techniques, communications, working with a dog, medical skills, So you have almost a month's worth of school before you are, pinned as an operator.
In the HRT, are you really focused on surveillance broadly, or is it much more tactical surveillance?
Much more tactical. Yeah, much more, sniper type surveillance. But you're sitting in a hide for days on end, and what kind of reconnaissance and information and intelligence are you picking up on that hide?
For the HRT, can you, just since we haven't had anybody on here who's done that before, can you kind of explain the mission set and expectations of that organization?
Well, the HRT got started direct result of the 1972 Munich Olympic Games, where the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, took 13 Israeli hostages, 13 Israeli athletes hostage in the 1972 Munich Olympics. Now, in 1972, the Olympic Games were like the only thing that was televised worldwide. It was long before internet, long before satellites. So everybody in the world watched the Olympics. So in the middle of the Olympic Games, 13 Israeli athletes were held hostage by the PLO, stopped the games. They ended up wanting to leave to safety with the hostages. They said they would release the hostages when they landed. The German police attempted a rescue raid at the Munich airport. During that rescue raid operation, all 13 hostages were killed, and I believe 6 or 8 of the hostage takers escaped. The United States had already been awarded the 1980 Lake Placid Winter Olympics, and had already been awarded the 1984 Los Angeles Summer Olympic Games. So America knew that we had 2 Olympic Games in the very near future. President Nixon at the time called a Security Council together after the Munich massacre and asked the Security Council, okay, what is the U.S. response should we have an incident similar to what happened in Munich? And the National Security Council basically raised their hands and we don't have a response. I may be a little bit off in my history, but from what I understand, Delta Force was in existence, but it was so secretive at that time that the government disavowed it even existed. Dev Group, SEAL Team 6, and Dick Marcinko, they were just now getting started or hadn't even started yet. So SEAL Team 6 didn't exist either. So that, coupled with the fact that the military cannot operate on domestic soil because of the Posse Comitatus Act, President Nixon looked at the FBI director, said, okay, FBI director, develop a team that has a skill set that can address this kind of threat that we had in Munich. That was the genesis of the HRT. So the HRT had a selection, chose the first 75 operators. I think 50 made it through the selection process, and they spent almost a year down at Fort Bragg with the very secretive Delta Force being trained by Beckwith and his individuals down there. Did not become operational until 1983. So 1983 was the first year they were operational. HRT did miss the window for 1980 Winter Olympic Games, and we did make the window for 1984 Los Angeles Summer Olympic Games. So that's how HRT got started. Again, the reason we have the HRT is because, like I said earlier, the Posse Comitatus Act. You can't have these tier 1 units, or any military for that matter, operate on domestic soil in the United States unless martial law is declared. Okay, so the United States, National Security Council in this arsenal needs a tier 1 type unit to address tier 1 type operations here in the United States. And as a result of the first team being trained by the guys down at CAG and Fort Bragg, we still have a very good relationship with them. We, again, as a result of a lot of former Navy SEALs joining the Bureau and joining HRT. The most famous former SEAL HRT operator is Tommy Norris, Congressional Medal of Honor winner. And he only has one eye. And the story behind that is when he was awarded his Congressional Medal of Honor, again, this is years after he left the SEALs and the Navy, because it takes that long for the process for the CMH. I forgot which president it was, but President asked him when he received the medal, what he wanted to do next. And Tommy Norris said, I wanted to go in the FBI, but they won't let me because I have one eye. Because at that time, the FBI, you had to have two eyes to get into the FBI. So the president made sure that that didn't stop him. So Tommy Norris became an FBI agent. And he also was a plank owner for the HRT. So he's one of the first guys to become an HRT member. So one of our, very honored and prestigious members of the HRT is Mr. Tommy Norris, Congressional Medal of Honor winner. And I'm very proud to call him a friend. And he's a superhuman being, super American, and just, they don't make him like that anymore. But Tommy Norris is the operator, or the Navy SEAL, who he won his Congressional Medal of Honor when he rescued. They made a movie with Gene Hackman, BAP 21. So Tommy Norris went in and brought out this shot down pilot who had he's like a major or lieutenant colonel, had a lot of information, and they sent Tommy and a South Vietnamese SEAL in, and they pulled him out. They rescued him. He got a CMH for it, right? A year later, operation, Tommy Norris is shot in the eye, left for dead. And another SEAL crawls through gunfire, barrage of machine gun fire and everything else, gets to Tommy, realizes he's still alive, carries him to safety. And that Navy SEAL wins a Congressional Medal of Honor for saving the life of a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient.
Oh, geez, that is incredible.
That's a great story.
It is. They don't make them like that anymore. Hey, I believe you would end up spending considerable time outside the U.S. with the HRT. How did that evolve over time?
The U.S. government determined that they don't care how an individual is captured or where he's captured if he's indicted in the United States, as long as he's arrested in the United States. And that came as a result of the Kiki Camarena case. Kiki Camarena was a DEA agent who was tortured and killed in Mexico during the height of the drug war. And the DEA and I believe some people from CAG went down to Mexico and captured the doctor who killed Kiki Camarena during torture sessions. And they brought him to the fence line of the Mexican-U.S. border, cut the fence, rolled him across the border, and DEA was there on United States soil saying, you're under arrest. Well, the prosecution, the defense argued that, wait a minute, he was kidnapped in Mexico. He was brought to the United States illegally against his own will. And the government, the United States, of course, the United States says, we don't care how he got here. So that kind of opened the door. So now if we have an indicted subject, AKA Osama bin Laden, for the World Trade Center bombing, and he's in the caves of Tora Bora, they don't care how Osama bin Laden gets back to America as long as he's arrested by an FBI agent. So during that hunt for UBL, especially in the kids of Tora Bora, there was always a couple HRT guys with Dev Group or CAG, it was Dev Group at the time, who was hunting for him there. There's always a couple of HRT operators assigned to those units in search of UBLs. In the event that he was captured, we could do two things. One, we could place him under arrest, by a federal agent, and then we can maintain chain of custody for all the evidence that was gathered there. So now when he comes back to the United States on our FBI airplane out of Bagram Air Force Base, comes to New York and stands trial, we can raise our right hand and we can testify that we were there the whole time, chain of custody for evidence, chain of custody for him, all that requirements under the U.S., Title 18 USC, under the United States Code. We are abiding by that in providing Osama bin Laden all the right,
Can you talk us through maybe one or two of the tougher ops that you went through, whether it's from a leadership perspective, what you learned, something that you saw someone else do, the challenges, the courage? What were some of those like?
Well, probably one of the most famous domestic operations that I was involved in. And there's been several since then. I left the team in 2007, I think. But they've done a lot of operations since then. But one of the ones I was involved in was a DC snipers, Lee Boy Malvo and John Mohammed. These two knuckleheads, one was a kid, 17 years old, and one was a 35-year-old man. They shut down Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Southern Maryland for, 28 days, 22 days, something like that, a little over 3 weeks. I mean, they later shut it down. This was October of 2002, so just a year and a month after 9/11. So terrorism was on everybody's mind, and they shot and killed. They killed 10 and injured another 13, I believe, in the 3 weeks. And if you don't know the story, it's a great read. DC sniper story. Bottom line is they were in a 1996 Caprice Classic that the back seats folded down. They would pop the trunk just a few inches, and the kid with an AR-15 Bushmaster with a real cheap optic on it, not suppressed or anything, would take pot shots out of the, laying down in the trunk of the car, that he would access by folding down the seats in the back seat. So he just crawled from the front seat, lay the seats down, crawl in the back, pop the trunk a few inches, put the barrel of the rifle through the crack of the trunk, and shoot his victims. He shot 2 the first day and like 5 the second day. And at the time, the police didn't think it was the same person. And it ends up that it was the same person. But you look at 2 guys in a vehicle that probably cost them $5,000 or less, with a weapon system that probably cost less than $1,000, and they shut down what 300, 400 square miles of territory. You had people, Starbucks even came out and said that they had lost like 75% of their revenue in the 3 weeks these guys were shooting because people were afraid to go to Starbucks. You had gas stations putting up blue tarps because the first couple of shots they did were at people pumping gas at a gas station because there was no rhyme or reason who got shot. We come to find out afterwards, and John Mohammed, the adult, has since been put to death, and Lee Boyd Malvo is still in prison. But come to find out that John Mohammed lost custody of his kids to his ex-wife. His plan was to shoot her in one of these random shootings, but because so many other people have been shot, that they wouldn't think that he was a shooter. Because if she was just shot, obviously the police were going to think, who's the first person going to want to shoot her? Her ex-husband. It's always who we think first, right? Well, he knew that. So he wanted to shoot 12, 13, 14, 20 people, whatever the case is, and have her be one of these random shootings. So he would get custody of the kids, but never be considered a suspect in these killings. Like a lot of times in these cases, pride got the best of them. They thought they were smarter than the FBI, smarter than the police. They started, pimping us, for lack of a better word, saying you didn't catch us in Alabama, you're not going to catch us now. Now they left that note at one of the sites of their shooting, and I can tell you right now, the FBI had no idea Alabama was even in play. Alabama, what the hell does that mean? So now the FBI does what the FBI does best. Once they get a scent, they'll track it down. So they looked at recent cases where there was a sniper type attack. They found one at a gas station. There was a magazine or something like that was found at the crime scene that was picked up. They had a partial print. They reran the partial print. It came back to John Mohammed somehow. They found out that he lived in Seattle. They went to Seattle and they looked at the house where he used to live. And lo and behold, in the back of his house, in a very rural area of the outskirts of Seattle, there's a tree stump in his backyard. The tree stump had bullet holes in it where he was practiced shooting his AR-15. They dug out a round from the tree stump, and lo and behold, the ballistics matched the same rounds that were captured from some of the murders in Washington, D.C. So now we have our guy, and once we have a guy's name and his picture, it's only a matter of time before we find you, and unless you're Eric Rudolph. So we ended up finding him at a rest stop. A trucker gave us, we found out what kind of car he drove. We put an APB out on the car. Trucker, in the outskirts of Frederick, Maryland, saw the car parked at a rest stop, and about 3 in the morning, HRT snuck up, busted the 2 windows, the doors, the 2 windows on each side of the car, and dragged both of them out without a shot being fired. So that was a good operation. It only lasted 3 weeks, but the amount of cooperation we got from the public was amazing, especially after they shot that 10-year-old boy walking into middle school. Once you shoot kids, and then kind of rules change a little bit. But to see what they could do just by 2 guys, because I always said, we did a lot of red cell, worst case scenario, what would happen type work on HRT. You put 10 of these teams or 20 of these teams in cities all across the nation and have them shoot their first shot the day, on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and see what kind of economic impact they'll have on those cities. And, again, for less than $5,000-$6,000, these guys are able to turn the city on its back and just prevent the city from operating.
What despicable people. Just, I mean, oh God. How about, it, do you have a particular experience? I'm sure on the HRTs you have to, but like kind of where you came close to not making it out? Or do you
Not
typically have such a decisive advantage in timing?
Yeah, when we went out again, this was in Iraq. I didn't do any Afghan deployments, but I did do two Iraq deployments. And we were working with CAG. So you have the best guys in the world plus your HRT, component, and then you have 30 Rangers with you as well. And we were looking, for the deck of cards, the top 52. This was in 2003 and 2004, so this is right after the invasion. So we had our own hooch right there outside the green zone, um, right by the 14th July Bridge, I think it was, and built a really nice house there, and worked with CAG, who was just down the street from us, and we work every night. We go out with them every night. The agency would develop targeting packages, and we'd go out and hit sometimes two, three places a night, looking for those guys that were you know that had mortars in their residences, or a top 52 deck of cards, or had ties to anybody that were IED makers. But they were so well planned out by the agency and by CAG and by us, and I it was a lot of fun. I mean, but it really was an overwhelming, use of force, where you would have, four Hummers on each corner of the building, and each Hummer had four Rangers in it. And then you're with a team of about 8 or 10, CAD guys, and you have your two or three or four HRT guys. You know, you'd be a fool to get in a firefight with that. So, I mean, there were a couple of times, that shots were fired and people were killed, but CAG kept us at the end of the line because they weren't that familiar with us, so we were always in the last of the stack, but we were in the stack. Um, so by the time we got in there, they had already cleaned it up, whatever mess there was.
Did did it feel pretty similar when you're looking at a CAG guy versus an HRT guy, like kind of the demeanor, mindset, or are there any subtle differences that you kind of see over time?
Well, I mean, again, they're the best of the best, and their training, is the best in the world, and um, they had the same swagger, I guess, that HRT does, and that Dev Group does. It's a certain swagger. The confidence is, you can just feel it in the air, which is great to be surrounded by guys like that. Um, and then in '03 it didn't happen. In '04 and since then afterwards, we would start doing workups with them. So we'd be assigned to them months in advance before the deployment. So that way they got to see who we were, got to see our skill set. And then later on in the GWAT, we were definitely more involved because they're like, okay, these guys can hold their own. They know what they're doing. So, it's like, okay, you guys go hit that outer building, we'll hit this outer building, and we'll meet and hit the main building, whatever the case is. So they were definitely, once we worked into workups with them, they were more comfortable in allowing us to be more involved.
Are there women in the HRT today?
Mm-mm.
Still all men.
Yep.
Some of the folks I've interviewed from the military have gone on to law enforcement, and it's sad to say this, but because of the way the public perceives law enforcement at times over the past few years, they don't want to say on air that they are a cop, which I hate hearing. What's it been like for you with public perception being part of law enforcement? I know bureau is different, but
Yeah.
you might be seen similarly in some cases. Just how have you seen and dealt with that or felt it for you and the community?
For the most part, I think a majority of the people, and I'm 62 years old. And obviously, I retired back in 2015. So I think they recognize that I was, as I say, I was in the bureau when I was still pure and and well respected. Um, but you know, the one of the hardest transitions for me was, and you probably get this as well. I work for the agency. You spend your entire career, and me working drugs and doing all these SWAT things in HRT. Spend your entire career staying below the radar. Last thing I want is my picture in the paper or my name in the paper. And I worked very hard to make sure that never happened. Then I get sent to Budapest, Hungary, as a first legal attaché there, and now they're having press conferences in Hungary, you know, talking about my background, who I am, interviewing me on Hungarian TV, so the whole world sees my face and knows I'm former HRT. I mean, that was a hard,
Interesting. Yeah.
hard paradigm for me to change. And then it got even worse once I got out of the bureau. Now I start my own security company, and I need something that sets me apart. Well, what sets me apart? Well, I'm only one of 450 HRT operators in the world, so I want to market that. So now I am, you know, telling everybody I'm a former HRT operator. This is what sets me apart. I've done operations overseas and everything else, you know, and everything inside of me says, keep your mouth shut. Don't say this. You can't be doing this. And again, with your show right now,
Yeah.
you have to do the exact same thing. You know, everybody out there knows what your background is and what you used to do. And we used to keep that pretty close to the chest. And you know, it got to a point now where it's like open. Then I write a book, and then same thing. So there's no more hiding. That's for damn sure. You Google my name and everything pops up, from interviews on NBC to Good Morning America to my book to my company. So that was that was a hard transition. But for the most part, I do think I would not want to be an FBI agent now. I really would not. Because I know when I knocked on the door and I have my credentials here, I'm Greg Shaffer, the FBI, I have a few questions to ask you. You could see the blood drain from their body, and they're like, oh my God, the FBI is here. I mean, it was the reputation, the respect enabled us to do our job so effectively. And I know by talking to agents now on the street, they're saying that doesn't happen anymore.
What?
Like, we're with
Really?
the FBI, and they're like, double middle fingers and F you, I'm not talking to you. Do you have a warrant? Before, if anyone wants to talk to you, you talk to the FBI. I mean, no one, just out of fear and out of respect. Now, and I will tell you what, FBI knocks on my door, I'm gonna say, you got a warrant? I ain't about to talk to an FBI to come in. No way. No, or any police officer. No way.
What? Why is that? Why do you say that?
Because one, I know I've done nothing wrong. And if they're questioning me about my political beliefs or the weapons that I own or whatever the case is, none of their damn business.
Yeah. Where does the book come from? Why write this? As you said, I understand the challenge of trying to remain anonymous, but you also, you do have stuff that sets you apart. So I'm sure there was something inside you wanting to write it as well. Where did it come from?
Well, I really got started in the active shooter program right as I was leaving the bureau, and also, when I started my own company. Active shooters, still to this day, are a huge threat and a huge concern. And I just saw people doing the exact opposite of what they should be doing when they're caught in an active shooter event. You know, for instance, the hit rate on a moving target by a man with a handgun is 4%. Four. You have a 96% chance of not being shot with on one thing, running. So why are we hiding under our desks? Why are we hiding under the cash register or under a church pew or in a closet? Okay, 4% hit rate on a moving target. Sutherland Springs Church, they had 26 people killed. Well, 28 people escaped. The 28 people escaped did one thing: they ran out the back door. The 26 that were killed in that small church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, were all hiding behind the pews. Okay, so hiding's the worst possible option. Okay, another thing: the average distance that an active shooter shoots his victims is less than 5 feet, not 5 yards, 5 feet. Okay, with the exception of Mandalay Bay, of course. That was an anomaly. But those that again hide are the ones that are shot and killed because they're cowering, they're not moving. So less than 5 feet, 4% hit rate on a moving target. Why would you hide? And so I take these these statistics here, and I'm seeing people. We even do it in our schools where my daughter teaches special education in Northern Virginia, and I know she will do what needs to be done. There's an active shooter in her school. She's going to break the window, and she's going to get all her kids out of the school and run as far and fast away from the school as possible. Why? Where's the shooting occurring? In the school. Where do you don't want to be? In the school. So the sheltering in place, unless you got some serious skill sets or weapons or some ballistic doors and windows, sheltering in place is not the answer. Anyway, long story short, I saw the mistakes that everybody's making, and I want to fix this. I want to educate the public on what they can do to survive. So, my very first chapter is survival mindset. The example I use for my survival mindset chapter is, the Pulse nightclub. 9 people ran into a restroom at the Pulse nightclub. They ran into it because their friends were being shot and killed on the dance floor. Okay, and we know what happens next because most of the people in that restroom will call 911, which is being recorded. The shooter walks into that restroom, and it takes him almost 30 seconds to shoot and kill all 9 of those people. All 9 of those people huddled together and waited for their turn to die. Now, I don't mean to speak ill of the dead. I wasn't there. But I do know, Ryan, if you were there and I were there and we had 700 people with us, we get in that restroom, we're going to say, okay, when that son of a gun shows up, here's what we're going to do. You grab the weapon. You gouge his eyes out. You grab his left hand. You grab his right hand, left leg, right leg. You grab for his groin. We're going to rip this man apart limb by limb. Because if we don't, we die. Well, at the Pulse nightclub, they just sat there. They huddled together and waited for the turn to die. Nobody stood up and said, hey, let's do something about this. That's survival mindset. They didn't have it. So my very first chapter is survival mindset, and then second chapter is situational awareness. If you have 2 of those, chances are you're going to survive most encounters. Good situational awareness, good survival mindset, you're good to go for the rest of your life. So those are my first 2 chapters. And then I talk about, EDC, everyday carry, and then I break it down into churches and schools and corporations and executive protection and that sort of thing. But I wrote the book just to educate the public. Was really pleasantly surprised at how well it sold, and it's still selling today. So, as my wife says, it's a very expensive business card. But it does open a lot of doors. Opens a lot of doors. And when I give speeches, I sell a lot of books and everything else. So I really enjoyed writing it. I really did. I had a fun time writing it. It took me about probably 11 months to write.
What would you advise me to tell my kids, for instance? Is it, hey, get out of that school? Is that the suggestion there?
This is the question I ask too because I talk a lot to schools and that sort of thing. And I ask the teachers or I'll ask the parents, because whenever I talk to a school, I always say, okay, I'll talk to the school and the teachers and the staff and everything else, but I'll do this for free. That evening, open the auditorium up and invite every parent of the school there. And I'll ask the parents during my presentation, how many parents here have asked their teacher during parent-teacher conferences, because you have several a year, how many of you parents have asked the teacher, what are you going to do to save my child in the event of an active shooter? Never a hand goes up. Not one, not ever.
I've never asked that.
I shame them. That's a shame on you. Shame on you. So you have no idea what the teacher's going to do to keep your kids safe?
No.
Shame on you, Ryan.
Just beyond what they do for drills.
Okay. What do you do for drills?
Which is a shelter in place, is my understanding. So obviously a question I need to ask.
What kind of doors do they have? What kind of windows do they have?
Yeah.
I bet you the doors are not ballistic. Even those big, thick doors.
No way.
And you also look at these school shootings, and they always ask afterwards, about the shooter. And virtually the name of the shooter was widely known by the students and by the faculty, that if things went bad, it'd be this individual. So we're doing a horrific job on the prevention side and a horrific job on the response side. Yeah. I mean, you look at Broward County and that coward there didn't go into school. You look at Uvalde, don't even get me started on that one. 388 police officers show up and they all stand outside and do nothing. Our response is only as good as a human being can be, and humans are, we're failed individuals. And it's hard to ask an individual to run to the gunfire. I mean, that's what they're told to do, and they need to be trained to do that. But push comes to shove and the bullets are flying, as well as I do, being in combat, that not everybody runs to the gunfire. Fear does come into play. But let's talk about prevention more. One of the statistics, again, I say in my book is, the student to counselor ratio in our schools for school counselors is 500 students per counselor. 500. Okay. The National Association of School Counselors, recommends 250 to 1. So we're double that. In our U.S. prison systems, it's 200 prisoners to 1 counselor. So our prisoners are getting better counseling than our students are. You improve the counseling, I guarantee you these shooters will be identified a lot better and a lot easier, and we'll be able to get them help prior to them on that pathway to violence. Because there is a pathway to violence. And again, all these shooters in these schools, the teachers and the students all will say, it doesn't surprise me it was him.
Just so I'll bring this to a close here. I did want to ask, you've got a dagger on the wall behind you. I was curious where that comes from, because it looks pretty cool and it reminds me of some of the agency ones we might have seen.
That's a Hungarian National Police ceremonial dagger.
Very cool.
Given to me by the Hungarian National Police.
How did you like that role, being a legal attaché at an embassy posting?
It was fun. Totally different world. Working with legal attachés and embassies. I mean, working in an embassy is just a different world altogether. Budapest, in my opinion, is the greatest city in all of Europe, hands down. I spent 3 years in Paris. My parents used to live in Germany. I've traveled all over the world. Budapest is amazing. Uh, but one of the things that was unique about my position in Budapest is I was allowed to carry a firearm. And of course, you have to get permission from the host government to do that. But because I had a task force, an FBI task force there working with local police to combat the Russian organized crime in Budapest. So we were always a potential target. So my task force officer, my FBI task force guys, and myself were granted permission by the Hungarian government to carry our sidearms. So we did that, and one of the very few attaches, particularly in Europe, that was authorized to carry a sidearm. But Hungarian people are just amazing people. The city is gorgeous. It's safe. It's fun. I still have many, many dear friends there. Say hello to my friends in Budapest and all the police officers there. And it was a fantastic 3 years of my life.
That's great. Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap us up here. There's two questions I ask everybody. The first is there anything that you carried with you? And I'm trying to frame it for the work that you did, but I guess when you were deploying, is there anything that you carried with you that had sentimental value, something that somebody gave you, maybe a good luck charm that you took with you either on the deployment or when you went outside the wire?
No, just I always had a picture of my wife and my family with me. So I
Yeah.
guess that would be the one thing.
Did you carry it on you?
I carried it on me. Yeah.
Where would you wear
And
it?
you weren't supposed to.
Right.
You weren't supposed to. So I carried it in a little pocket in my body armor, on the inside of my body armor. Can't keep the sweat off of it. But one thing I always did too, I always kept a journal. So I kept a journal as a commanding officer of a patrol boat, and I kept the journal for everything I did on the HRT, and brought the journal with me and wrote in there every night when I was overseas as well. So that's one thing I always did, was always keep a journal of my exploits.
That is so smart. I tell a lot of the young guys out there, keep a journal because I did not do that. And I wish that I had. You just forget so much over time. Oh, that's great. Okay. And then the last question is just looking back on probably some scary moments that you had, whether it was Coast Guard, Bureau, HRT, the challenges, the sacrifice, a lot of deployments. Would you go back and do that again?
I go back tomorrow and do it again. It's just, again, Coast Guard, patrol boat, just a tight knit team, esprit de corps. Everybody has their job, and if one person doesn't do their job, the whole system fails. The engines fail, the navigation fails, the law enforcement aspect fails, and same thing with SWAT teams and HRT, or even a drug squad. Being in those small, tight knit, teams just develops that kinship and that brotherhood. And I'd say one final word about the HRT: not a finer group of men exists in the world today. I know you have CAG and Dev Group and MARSOC and a lot of great units out there, but I wouldn't trade my time on HRT for anything or with anybody. Just You always knew they had your back. You always felt comfortable because of the confidence and the skill sets that they trained in you. And we never went into an operation where failure was even considered. Certainly not an option. And I just carry that with me. That's why that poster is hanging right there. The HRT is something that I'm very proud of, and I wish those guys the best and to stay safe and keep coming home at night.
Perfect. Thanks so much for the time, Greg. This was a blast. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I'm honored to be your first FBI individual on your podcast. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. Greg is a treat to have on. I mean, the guy's got stories galore. I know we didn't even scratch the surface, and it makes me want to talk to more HRT operators. I've heard amazing things about them. I've worked very closely with the Bureau in some instances overseas and in the US, actually. So just getting to sit down with them again, hear some of their stories and how they're brought up is fascinating to me. So glad we had Greg on. Thank you all for sticking it out this long. If you're the brave few who have made it this far, definitely check out our newsletter, combatstory.com/newsletter, and you can support us at patreon.com/combatstory. Both greatly appreciated. If you haven't already, please do like, subscribe, give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple if you have the time. It means a lot and helps push this content out to other people so they can hear about these amazing stories. With that, got a couple listener comments. The first is from one of our subscribers on YouTube. It's Echo Red 4, which is an awesome name. It says, great interview and new information. This is great content. And this was about the operator syndrome with Dr. Free, which was just something slightly different from our usual, but something I really wanted to do because it hit a nerve with me. And I think when you got people like Derek Natalini, Mike Sorelli from Delta and DevGru respectively, supporting something and pushing it and putting their name behind it, it really matters, especially in this mental health space. So that was great to hear. And then from another subscriber, Carl Fisher 4163, also on operator syndrome, very good interview, really appreciate it. And then the last one is from Kevin Litton 765, who said, very interesting interview. I think more veterans will find this is more than just a mental issue and something drugs can fix. Thank you for doing this, Ryan. Definitely want to say thanks to Dr. Free. I hope you all have a great rest of your week or weekend, wherever you are, and stay safe.